Alrighty, and we are rolling on another episode of the Love That podcast. My name is Diego, and I am your host. I want to thank each and every one of you for listening into another episode. On today's episode of the show, we are going to be continuing our conversation from the previous episode, which was a discussion about the current situation going on in Cuba, the health and economic crises that they find themselves in, and to a certain extent subjected to by foreign governments, specifically our home here in the US, and what our government has done to these people that have brought them to this moment that they find themselves in. I had mentioned in last week's episode that we might get another episode this week, just because I wanted to expand upon developing stories and also give more context and information. I wanted to be able to take a couple days to learn more myself, see what other people are saying and reporting, and just kind of see how the news played out and how the president and members of the government position themselves with regard to the situation in Cuba. So I feel that we're going to have maybe not a super long discussion, but definitely a more informed perspective I think we will probably end on, and we might end with more questions than we would do answers, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's always good to be skeptical. There's a difference between being a skeptic and a conspiracy theorist. I have a generous or like a healthy level of skepticism does not necessarily inhibit you from enacting any sort of change or moving in a more positive way. So in last week's episode, we touched upon politicians and their ability to use moments. Sometimes it's not always moments of tragedy, but use moments to spin or fuel their particular political agenda. Sometimes in ways that are more pervasive than others, or sometimes in ways that are more I guess maybe immoral is the right word, or I'm not sure how you would categorize it, because frankly I'm not sure. I think it depends on what the situation is, how I would categorize it. For the sake of dissecting it, when we have politicians using economic and medical tragedy that humans are going through as a way to promote themselves, promote the country, promote their political party or their political agenda, I feel is disingenuous. It lacks character, and also, frankly, it is dishonest, because the U.S. has such a big part to play in what is happening in Cuba right now. And I want to give a little bit of context, because it's I think I vaguely touched on it, but to get more clarity on the situation, I wanted to go a little bit more in depth with what specifically I mean when I say that the U.S. has and holds responsibility for the situation that Cuba finds themselves in, economically speaking, which I mean also bleeds into the medical issues that they're also experiencing. It all has to do with trade, with embargoes placed, with sanctions, that the U.S. being such a large and powerful country with major foreign policy allies across the globe can do to a smaller country that is on an island very, very close to the US. So I want to just talk a little bit about that, just so that we get a little bit more background information. So it's important to note that the official U.S. policy, meaning that what the country thinks and believes as far as Cuba is concerned, is that Cuba is a socialist country, meaning that they are an adversary and an enemy to the overall health and well-being of the world, because the U.S. comes from a quote-unquote democratic society which promotes free will. Poster child for free will and freedoms. We all know that the lived reality of that is different depending on who and what people will classify and identify you as. But more to that point later. The U.S. also has officially been at the center or the leader or the brains of over 600 assassination attempts against the leader of Cuba, Fidel Castro. And this is widely accepted and common knowledge at this point. One of the most famous, and probably something that broader listenership might more closely remember, is the event of the Bay of Pigs, which in the U.S. has been spun into a heroic actions taken by the military, I guess is the best way to politically correctly say it, but was actually a plot to overthrow the government of Cuba. The U.S. initially started by bombing Cuba and then inserting Cuban exiles, about 1,500 of them, all who had armed combat training from the U.S. military, to infiltrate Cuba and create chaos and disrupt the Cuban government from the inside. So in layman's terms, the U.S. bombs Cuba, then drops 1,500 basically combat trained, ready warriors to start an insurrection in Cuba against the government of Cuba. There have also been unclassified or declassified records that have stated that the U.S. government has even gone to lengths of trying to orchestrate attacks on domestic soil, meaning attacks on our own land, attacks within the U.S., to then blame it on the Cuban government as acts of terrorists, just terrorist attacks, I guess that's what you would call it, or foreign government attacks, that sort of thing. And all of this is related to the U.S.'s mindset that socialism, communism, anything but democratic, democracy, anything but democracy is not sustainable and should fail. And we have gone through extreme lengths to prove a point that the way that we do it here in the US and Western thought is the way that everywhere should be. And what I had discussed in the previous episode is that it's that particular point in our thought process here in the Western part of the world that we are so diehard individualistic. Then we say that everybody needs to be allowed to be their own person, but when we're talking about ways of thinking, we're always saying that we need to be singular in thought. How can we be all so different but think the same way? It does not make any sense, and it's not realistic. But what is real is our government's willingness to go to extreme lengths to preserve the idea of democracy, Western thought, because it holds this country together in a way that they believe is necessary, I guess. This is all tied to the American dream, the idea that a lot of our parents who are immigrants to this country that they grew up thinking that, you know, it was the land of opportunity and that you could work hard and gain the rewards that you deserved for that work, which, I mean, of course, in a lot of cases can be true, but this country was founded upon a very hurtful and a very dark and racist capitalistic manner in which it's hard to get ahead in this country without really understanding and knowing that we need to dismantle a lot of the institutions and the way that things were built, because it's a lot of lip service but not a lot of experienced prosperity, in the sense that we are the land of opportunities and freedoms. Certain freedoms are protected, certain freedoms are accepted, but other ones aren't, and we need to work towards getting to that that ideal sense of America that we all think, I think that we all would love to get to at a certain point, but we just know it's not, you know, it's not the reality right now. A perfect example is that the recent U.S. appropriations budget allocated over $20 million for a Cuba democracy fund, which is meant to promote democracy, which is what they don't have in Cuba, because they live under a socialist regime, I guess. What I have to say to that is, you know, it says a lot that the U.S. is willing to spend money to, quote unquote, promote democracy in a different country when we have our own history and our own current issues with democracy. We have legislators in Texas, Democratic legislators in Texas, that are fleeing the state, going to Washington because they know that they cannot be arrested there, so that we can draw attention to the fact that lawmakers, Republican lawmakers in Texas, are trying to take away voting rights from black and brown people, so that they don't lose elections like they have been, and that things stay the way that they are and don't get better for black and brown people. It is specific. If you're trying to keep a certain sect from voting, it's because you feel that their voice and their opinions shift and move the needle in a particular way that you don't like, meaning that they're advocating for themselves and for the betterment of black and brown people across their state and you know, wherever they are voting from, whatever districts that they represent. You're literally saying, no, that's not good for what I want. These people are not saying, you know, we're voting for what's like I can't even make false equivalencies here. It's just so hard because it's like, it's so cut and dry that it's like hard to make some sort of little anecdotes, because they don't really exist. You know, our issues with democracy are very real, and we need to grapple with them before we start talking about being the moral compass of democracy across the world. Like, please. And let us not also forget that the U.S. loves to throw out the word democracy to mean the U.S.'s version of democracy. Like, when the U.S. says democracy, they mean the U.S. version of democracy, which can be different depending on the era that we're in, who's in power, what's the majority, and what's the overall consensus of the country. We've seen this in Libya, we've seen it in Egypt, we've seen it in Iraq, in Iran, all parts of the Middle East, in places where we're always talking about there being turmoil. The U.S. at every turn has their nose everywhere, fighting for the quote-unquote good of democracy. Meanwhile, we have all these, you know, issues, and it kind of goes back to, you know, that old school saying, you know, sweep around your own porch before you come and sweep around mine. And it's very true. We as individual countries should work within ourselves, better ourselves, so that we can outwardly become better global citizens. I know that sometimes that can be like, oh, a cheap shot, because there are instances of extreme oppression and negligences and hurt that people experience, and moments of crises where that whole expression about, staying within the house and just helping yourself, we would need to extend a helping hand. This is that instance. The US needs to extend the helping hand, but the helping hand is not creating hashtags about SOS Cuba, which is just, a spin tactic to promote our version of Western democracy, which is just the US's idea of what policy should be as far as trading, economics, government, all that kind of stuff. Instead of all that, we should be focusing on telling our government, stop the embargoes and stop the sanctions, so that the Cuban people can actually live, so that they can get the care that they need, the supplies that they need, the raw materials that they need to help themselves. There was a news conference with the leader of Cuba, and he was talking about, in response to the words that Joe Biden had said, which was, Joe Biden basically said that the thoughts and prayers were with the Cuban people, and in their protest, I guess, against the Cuban regime. Basically, it was like a dog whistle to saying, we are okay with this country going through turmoil and protesting their own government because we would back somebody new, and it was kind of like that very vague, very middle of the ground politics from a pretty middle ground, bipartisan president, if you will. And it's worth noting that he's very okay, this is not meant to be shady, but he's very unoriginal in the way that he thinks about Cuba. And I mean that with like the most respect possible. But it's just, what I'm saying is that this the attitude towards Cuba is not something new. This is how the U.S. deals with Cuba and views Cuba based on the type of government that they have. The U.S. will do anything to quote unquote promote democracy in the world and uplift democracy, because we are the poster child of what freedom and democracy looks like at its best. It is also super noteworthy that, super noteworthy for us here in the U.S. to take into consideration the images being shown to us are from our own public, media or corporate media. A lot of them owned by rich billionaires that have vested interests in economic sanctions and in economic policies, which is why that, and then in turn shapes how our legislator turns out, because of intense lobbying by these rich billionaires who own all these different companies, the Elon Musk of the world, the Jeff Bezos, the Koch brothers, the NRA, all of those big businesses that influence so much of our culture also shape our media, and what the story is being told and what purpose it serves. Because when we're seeing images of the Cuban people protesting in the streets and claiming that they want change in their government, when they repost those here in the U.S. and publicize them, they say that the Cuban people are revolting and they're protesting. It goes with our policy of promoting democracy and freedom of speech and freedom of expression and protest. Even though in the lived reality of it, when people in the U.S. protest and they want to confront the injustices that they are being that they're being subjected under, unless they're white and male and racist and a KKK member, they get met with the police, which means that they get met with bats, bullets, plastic bullets, real bullets, smoke, gas, all that different kind of stuff, right? So it's kind of like a weird thing to think about, but it's something that we need to consider in the back of our mind. But also that a lot of the times that these images can sometimes be very warped. I recently saw this video on Instagram from an Instagram handle. I'm not going to say her name properly. Well, actually I will, because if you look at her Instagram, she tells you exactly how to say her name. It's Idalin Bobby, and she goes by she, her pronouns, and she has been posting a lot of really good information about the situation in Cuba and the different factors. She's getting a lot of different videos and a lot of different hubs, and she's kind of just posting it on her channel, and a lot of people have been reposting it. You can follow her at IDALINBOBE. That's where you can find her on Instagram. There was a specific video that she posted on her IG stories, or IGTV, I'm sorry, that was talking about the suspicious social media campaign of the SOS Cuba, and kind of really highlighting that it comes from a lot of bot accounts that follow the same message, promoting U.S. intervention or U.S.-led intervention, if not U.S. intervention, to establish some sort of democracy that has its, very similar callbacks to situations in Iran, Iraq, Libya, Egypt, where we change one quote-unquote dictator for one that the U.S. seems to think that they can control, only to further destabilize the country, because we are not actually letting democracy rule. We are choosing what democracy looks like for other people. And that's very, very important to keep in the back of our minds. And that's not to say that, the U.S. is public enemy number one. Every country is guilty of this. We are just a huge, huge country that wants to keep itself moving and believes that it needs to act certain ways to yield certain results. And this is where it starts with, with us as citizens telling our government and our leaders that this is not the way that we want to, or this is not the way that we want America to continue. We want to be a leader, but show why we are a leader. And it's not through strong arming, and it shouldn't be through strong arming, and we shouldn't believe that that's the way to go about it. Some of the IGTV videos also discuss the fact that the U.S. and global media is not also representing accurately the full scope of the Cuban people's opinion. Once again, we are trying to generalize and paint with one broad stroke a multitude of opinions and a multitude of people, because Cuba obviously will not have 100% the support of everybody, and we can't assume that it's the same thing. That we can't assume that the Cuban people all think the same way, because it's just not true for anybody. Nobody in the U.S., nobody in Mexico, nobody in Canada. There's difference of opinion any and everywhere that you will go, because people's lived experiences bring them to a place where they make decisions, and that's where they come from, and that's how they move, and it is what it is. But going more to that point was the fact that there have been a lot of public demonstrations of support of the Cuban government, sticking up for itself against basically, well, it would be the countries of Israel and the U.S., because they were the only ones that voted to keep the sanctions and embargoes on the on the Cuban people, and And it's also worth noting that, a lot of the Cuban people are simply stating that they feel that the US can do the biggest service to them by lifting the restrictions, the embargoes, the sanctions on Cuba so that they may more freely and readily get supplies, medications, raw materials, things that they feel that they need in order to support themselves and their people. And I think that's worth noting and taking heed and taking into account all sides. While, yes, one may think that the socialist regime is immoral in its practices, we also have to think about the immorality or the immoral nature with which a lot of governments act. Governments, period, act with, a lack of morals. One can argue that war is immoral, but almost every country on the world has engaged in it. So we have to take the good with the bad, but we also have to reconcile with what the reality is, which the reality will always be good and bad, and having good and bad in everything. So I kind of wanted to end the discussion with just a little summation of what I think are possible remedies to the situation. I feel that everybody should be more informed, and what I mean by that is try to look for, if you get a lot of your information through social media, look at the different Twitter handles and accounts and what they're saying. Are these people that are promoting the US? Are they these more bot accounts that are brand new, that have no tweets, that are all saying the same thing with a seemingly weird picture or no picture at all? Or are these actual accounts that are saying stuff in Spanish? I feel like that would probably tend more to be more realistic of what the Cuban people are thinking and saying. Granted, there have been reports that there have been power outages and internet shutouts, but read through that. I feel that a lot of us are tech savvy enough to know the difference between a fake tweet and something that is real, like somebody's real actually account. Apart from that, looking at news organizations and news sources from different Latin American countries and what they are saying, stuff outside of the US as well as stuff inside of the US, and you can compare and contrast, and you will see yourself, the difference in the verbiage and the way that different newscasters and correspondents and commentators will verbalize what they think and they feel about the current situation and the people that they bring on and the different experts and what they have to say about the situation. I ultimately feel that the U.S. would do the best, would do the biggest service by lifting those restrictions and those embargoes on Cuba that have been in place for over 60 years. And let us actually see what can happen from that and what the people decide to do if us as the U.S. are in the position that we support the Cuban people in their fight for democracy. Then let us actually see them do it. Let us retreat and encourage from afar, and not actually try to strong arm our will, our specific will, because historically the U.S. has not gotten it right when we try to intervene. And let's use this and let's lead by example by strengthening our democracy and strengthening voting rights acts, and strengthening the voting protections specifically for Black and brown and indigenous people in this country whose vote have been most marginalized and most under attack, especially with the prior administration, but also with legislators all around the country these last couple of months since the beginning of the year, frankly. It would be much more powerful if a country who just strengthened the voting rights for marginalized people within their country then gets on a platform talking about democracy and the protection of freedoms, rather than a country on fire as far as those issues are concerned, trying to up our nose to people who have been put in a position a lot of the time through no fault of their own, but also at the hands of the people that are then criticizing them. It's a little off. It's a little bit off. Once again, this is a developing story. It's going to be ongoing, and I'm interested to see how the presidency and, the powers that be and the foreign governments respond to everything that has been taking place, and how the American people and the global citizens respond to everything that has been happening, especially fueled by the protests in support of Palestine in the weeks prior. I think that's another important element to consider. The momentum that we've been seeing for the upliftment of marginalized countries and people, and really reconciling with a warped nationalized perception that we as Americans have had for a very, very long time. So I'm going to keep my eyes open. I hope that everyone else will also keep their eyes and ears open about everything that's happening around us, within our country. Obviously, we always have things going on. And yeah, let's go ahead and move into the Love That segment for today's episode. So for today's Love That segment, I wanted to discuss songs of the summer that I love, kind of following the music theme from the last Love That segment. I wanted just to mention a couple of my favorite summertime songs and why I love them. First off, I love summertime songs because they're always feel-good songs. They're usually upbeat. If they're not upbeat, then they're like romantic, inspiring, very jovial, very innocent, kind of fun, flirty, just like everything that we expect. I know growing up, we always expected our summers to be like incredibly epic and like just full of life and vibrance that we didn't get to express the rest of the year. And that's just kind of what, summertime songs have been synonymous with. Some of my favorite ones, the first one I know that comes to a lot of people's minds is Why Don't We Fall in Love by A-Marie, which is probably one of her biggest songs. It's just like an awesome song. I mean, it's been sampled so many times. And it's just like her voice is so clear. Her presence, and the song just like always, fit the kind of vibe that she was. She was very fun, a very vibrant artist. She was a great dancer too. Just like light, airy vocals. And then what we were talking about, a lot of times people relate summertime to romance and to love, and like just fluidity in the ocean and that kind of stuff. Love that song. Love that. I mean, another super iconic one that comes to mind, of course, is going to be Katy Perry's California Girls. It doesn't matter who you are. Everybody is a fan of Katy Perry's Teenage Dream album. That album is probably her best album as of late, or up to date, I guess is the right word. But that song specifically, California Girls, was just so massive. Then getting Snoop Dogg on it was just like so iconic for like, obviously for like obvious reasons, the California vibe. Like he just had to give it, come in and give his little 16, love that song. I'm trying to think of another like quick ones off the top of my head. I know I Like It by Cardi B with J Balvin and Bad Bunny. Huge summer song. I mean, honestly, before that song, the previous year, it was Bodak Yellow was the song of the summer. Huge record. Recently, I want to say probably song of the summer would have been Watermelon Sugar by Harry Styles. I don't know if it would qualify as song of the summer for this year because it's kind of been a minute. One Dance by Drake obviously was the song of the summer. And then what was that other one where he was talking about Kiki? See, Drake has so many songs that you just like, you literally forget about them, like how many there are. Oh, and of course you can't forget Despacito. In 2019, that was like the biggest song, period, point blank. Of course, the Queen Bee had Crazy in Love, huge song. And then like a quiet one that like nobody really, I guess, associates with summer, but it's definitely a song of the summer, was Umbrella by Rihanna in 2008. When that song came out, that was a moment when she was waterbending in the Matrix costume. That was like epic. That was definitely a song of the summer. Oh, I know a lot of people are gonna like this one, Summertime Sadness by Lana Del Rey. You know, that melancholy feel. She's very summer vibes to me, like her kind of music. If you're gonna listen to more slower kind of songs, she's very like summertime cruisy vibe, you know. Lil Nas X, I guess maybe you could think, has maybe Call Me by Your Name, could be classified as a song of the summer for this summer. Another one, a classic song of the summer, The Boy's Mine. Love. You know what? Probably song of the summer, the biggest contender right now for song of the summer is probably Kiss Me More by Doja Cat and SZA. Huge record. Definitely qualifies under a summertime song. Oh my god, Wild Thoughts, DJ Khaled and Rihanna once again. I'm trying to think about for last year who had the song of the summer. Probably Gaga and Ariana Grande with Rain on Me was probably song of the summer. We didn't really have much of a summer, but it was definitely the song of it. I know Dua Lipa would have had song of the summer with like any one of the 5 singles that went to #1 that she had last year. Her entire album was like the album of the summer. It was the album of the year, to be honest. But speaking of summer, okay, Demi Lovato's Cool for the Summer is a classic. She's known to break out a summertime song, like a summertime upbeat song. She's queen of that. Another important note, Demi Lovato recently came out as non-binary, so they, them. Although she did say recently that, you know, if people mistakenly misgender them, then, you know, it was not the biggest of deals. But I do want to stick to people's preferred gender expressions, so they definitely know how to come out with a summertime song. They're very good at that. That's like, it's like one of their secret talents, to be honest, because like they sing so well, so they could really sing anything. So it's kind of cool that they always lead with a like summertime anthem to lead them into their album that usually has like more diverse body of work. Let's go back to more iconic songs of the summer, like years past. I Want to Dance with Somebody, Whitney Houston, of course. Whitney had that. How could I not? Oh my god, I'm so dumb. Obviously, Hot Girl Summer by Megan Thee Stallion. I mean, she pretty much just sealed the deal for herself with that one. Ooh, another iconic one, Promiscuous from Nelly Furtado. Nelly Furtado was owner of the early 2000s with Timberland. Like, they really had their foot on our necks. They were so good, like, together. Like, the beats and stuff, and just her voice just like carried well with the records that she was putting out. Looking forward to more music coming out from her. I think they've said recently that we should be on the lookout. Not sure if she's thinking about making a record in Spanish or English or Portuguese, because she's from Portugal, I think. But either way, I'm excited for all of that. And so I would love to hear what everyone else's songs of the summer recommendations are. What are your current song of the summer recommendations? Which song are you loving? What song do you think people are probably going to be late to, and it'll end up being the winter song when it should have been the summer song, or vice versa, or, you know, however you want to say it. Once again, I do have the Instagram account for this podcast. It is the Love That Pod on Instagram. Once again, the Love That Pod on Instagram. And it is how it sounds. The Love That Pod. Short for podcast on Instagram. Like, follow, share, subscribe. I want to thank each and every one of you for listening into another episode, and I look forward to being with you guys all next week. Stay safe and have a wonderful rest of the week. Take care. Bye.